Okay, Brad, please settle the confusion. Is it choose Fi or choose FI? Hi there, I'm Mindy Jensen.
And I'm Carl Jensen.
And this is the Mindy
and Carl
on Money podcast, where we talk about what happens after you reach financial independence.
Why do we call this show Mindy on Money?
Because follow along with Mindy and Carl as they figure out what truly makes them happy, since they didn't really focus on it while pursuing financialindependence.com was already taken.
Wow, that's a long URL.
On this episode of the Mindy
and Carl
on Money podcast, Carl and I chat with Brad Barrett from Choose FI about the concept of financial independence and why so many people just don't seem to want to participate in the community.
But before we get started, let's take a quick break. Today's episode is sponsored by us? Wait, what?
That's right, Carl. Today's episode of Mindy
and Carl
on Money is sponsored by Mindy
and Carl
on Money. We'd like you to subscribe to our podcast, and you can do that by going to mindyonmoney.com/subscribe. And that'll give you a bunch of different links depending on what your preferred podcast app is.
Cool. I should subscribe.
You haven't subscribed yet?
No, I don't. Let's bring in Brad Barrett from Choose Fi, or is it Choose FI? I don't know. We'll talk about that in the podcast. He is going to kick off February Fi month.
Is it a real month-long celebration? Like, is it official? Does Hallmark sell cards?
Not yet, but they will. This week we kick off the month with Brad Barrett. Next week we'll discuss the most important financial decision you can make. You'll want to turn in for that. And hint, you may have already made this decision. Hope you chose wisely. Followed by 10 reasons to pursue FIRE. And then we wrap up the month with the top excuses people do not pursue financial independence. Brad, you're one of my oldest friends in the FIRE community. I think we first started talking way back in 2013 when you were running Richmond Savers. I remember we actually talked on the phone. You gave me travel tips for our trip to Hawaii. Do you remember that, Brad? That was that was like goodness. 10 years ago.
That was 10 years ago. That is so crazy. Yeah, it's hard to believe. I mean, I think we had a little conversation on Twitter the other day, and you said something to the effect of, yeah, I've known Brad for 10 years. And that was the inception of Richmond Savers. I think was like May of 2013. So it must have been like, I think the first FIRE websites I commented on way back in the day were yours and Brandon's, the Mad Scientist. So I think, you guys are my two, and you're wearing a shirt right now, as Mindy is pointing out. The two of you are my two oldest friends in the FI community. It's wild. So you were one of the very first people I did that, like, so I called it my free travel rewards coaching service back in the day. I think, with you, it was just, hey, let's jump on the phone. This is somebody who's a buddy of mine. But yeah, I mean, that was one of the wackiest things I ever did. But it was kind of like a springboard for everything that came after that in terms of like online business was, hey, I have this little site named richmondsavers.com. Like, and I also help a lot of people with travel rewards, but how could I actually make a difference? How could I maybe earn some money also? And I would offer this free phone call. I mean, I kid you not, guys. I was a CPA and a tax manager at like a big Fortune 500 level company. And at noon and 12:30, Monday through Friday, I had 30-minute phone calls with random people from my website. I mean, like it was wild. And that seems like a long, long time ago. It's crazy.
Isn't it interesting how different our lives are now 10 years ago? If you'd have asked me then on that phone call what I thought my life would have looked like now, I would have had no clue. And I'm sure you would have been the same. You've done Travel Miles 101, and you've totally blown up with Choose Fi, the biggest podcast in the financial independence community. It's crazy, right?
Yeah, it is hard to believe. I mean, 10 years ago, well, right, even, so say 11 years ago, right, or 10 and a half years ago, before I even started Richmond Savers, like there was no world where I ever could have imagined any of the things that have happened subsequently. And yeah, I mean, Choose FI was just kind of like lightning in a bottle to a large degree. I mean, it's pretty wild when you look at your life like that, right? And you say like, how the heck did this happen? Like all the steps, all the work, all the luck, right? Anybody who's successful and doesn't say that luck factored into it is a fool or a liar or naive, but obviously hard work factors into it as well, right? And like goodness, Carl, I never could have imagined. And it's one of those like super exciting things about the next 10 years, the next 20, the next 50 years is like, who the heck, if this much happened in 10 years for all of us, right? All three of us, what 10 years going to look like from now? I have no clue.
I love how you said that luck factors into it and then also came back around and said, but hard work factors into. Luck is absolutely a key factor, but luck seems to appear when there's a lot of hard work behind it. So it isn't just, oh, I lucked into this. You didn't luck into starting a podcast. You did a lot of hard work to come to the realization that, hey, a podcast would be really cool. And it has grown, and it's fun to watch how the podcast has grown, and especially the Facebook communities have grown, the local communities, the big main community, all the little offshoots. And that's not because of luck. That's because of hard work and really great content that you don't luck into. You get there from hard work. So I'm glad that you threw that in there too. But it has been really fun to watch. I remember Camp Fi 2018, my first Camp Fi. You and Jonathan were there, and we were around a campfire. And Carl had been telling me about your podcast. And I was like, I got to listen to this. This is going to be so exciting because I love Brad. I didn't know Jonathan at the time, but it was exciting to talk to you about it even way back then. And just to watch it grow has been fabulous.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys both. I really appreciate it. And yeah, that Camp Fi and Camp Mustache Southeast before that was 2017. I think that was where we first kind of made a name for ourselves. So yeah, a lot of very fond memories from those old Camp Fis. And I'm not sure if that was the one I lost my voice at, the 2018 one or not, or if that was 2019. But like, it's funny, I got laryngitis at one of those Camp Fis, and I kid you not, my voice is still brittle all these years later. Like, I go to a conference and like, I'm just worried about losing. So I have maybe deep scars from that. But going back to the luck for a second, I think the phrase that I've always used, and it's actually become so much more popular. I think that guy Sahil Bloom on Twitter uses this and gets credited for it. But I've been using this phrase for years, is luck surface area. And it's like, how can you increase your luck surface area? What are all the relationships? What's all the knowledge? What are all the skills you can build? All of these things go into, oh, that looks like some aspect of luck, or you're just ready when the luck hits you, right? And like, I think I was trying to build that surface area since I was a kid, and just learning as much as I could, reading as far and as wide. And then, honestly, Carl, just going back to like meeting you and Brandon, like that wasn't an overt thing by any means. It clearly wasn't. But frankly, like that was part of luck surface areas, like making genuine connections with people, making friendships. And somebody like Brandon, interestingly enough, in all these twists of fate, like because I knew Brandon and I had this little site, Travel Miles 101, like he had me on his podcast way back when. I think it was 2016. And this random guy, Jonathan Mendonça in Richmond, Virginia, heard that podcast and said, oh, wow, this guy Brad is in Richmond. He's into travel rewards and he's into financial independence. I am too. I'm all of those things, Jonathan said to himself. And he reached out to me and he said, hey, man, let's get lunch sometime. And he was just some random stranger who reached out to me through my website. And for whatever weird reason, I said yes. And one thing led to another. And that's what helped start Choose FI. And like, again, these little things that you can never prepare for the serendipity of it. But it's, again, learning far and wide, making genuine connections and friendships, not the swarmy, like glad handing, networking nonsense, but like real connections. Like you just never know where it takes you.
It is super cool, Brad. I think we have both stayed with Brandon in Scotland. Is that correct? I know I have.
Yeah, indeed. We didn't we hung out with Brandon and Jill in Scotland. We didn't actually stay at their place, I don't think, but yeah, because my whole family was there. So it was awesome to meet up with them in Edinburgh and just, yeah, I think we spent like 3 weeks in Scotland that time. That was a great trip.
Oh, nice.
I'm really thankful to know y'all because from the professional side, like to with podcasting and all the stuff we do now, but I'm more thankful to know y'all as friends. We don't live close to each other, but it's so neat when we bump into each other at these conferences, or I'm probably going to come to Richmond this spring.
Yeah, right back at you, my friend.
Let's get into your background before we get into the main meat of the conversation.
Brad, let's dive into your background. Have you always been money savvy?
Yeah, on some level, I was always money aware, let's say. So there's there's some funny stories in my family of maybe me being just like a little weird and obsessive compulsive of like, back in the day, like memorizing the serial numbers on dollar bills and things like that. And like which is utterly ridiculous, obviously, but that was when I was a little kid. And then when I was a teenager, I worked at like a comic book store and a baseball card store and, would get my like 10% employee discount. And, again, there's some silly stories in our family of how I kind of like cheated my brother out of one of maybe the lower lights of my life was me pocketing my 10% discount when he sent me to the store to buy his comic books and baseball cards. So again, not one of the things I'm proudest of in my life, needless to say. But I think on some level, I was always, like I said, a little bit money aware, though I wasn't like really steeped in it. And I other than that one particular job that I just mentioned, it wasn't like I was earning money as like a 15, 16, 17-year-old, like obsessively trying to accumulate money. It was just, there seemed to be something there. And then I guess really the first formative moment came for me, I think it was when I was 19. I had an internship at an investment company, Solomon Smith Barney, back in the day. And this was nothing special. It was basically, I was just like cold calling people. So it wasn't like a very glamorous internship by any means. But the one positive thing that happened for me that entire summer was one of the brokers sat me down in front of his computer and showed me a compound interest calculator. And it was like a Roth IRA compound interest of like, I think at the time it was like a $2,000 annual limit. So if you put $2,000 in, and keep in mind, guys, I was 19 years old, right? So, and you could play with what you expected the annual rate of return was. So I was putting in ridiculous things, 12, 13, 14%. But it was like, oh, wow. By the time I'm 99, I'm just making this up, it was like $700 million or so, with a $2,000 input every year. It was something ludicrous. But just to sit there and see, oh, wow, you mean if I only put in $2,000 a year every single year for the rest of my life, I'm going to have millions upon millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars. And now, obviously, again, that was a really unrealistic rate of return. But you and I, all of us know very, very well just how important compounding is. And I think that was one of the handful of lightning bolt moments in my life that was just, oh, wow, once I've seen it, I can't unsee it from here on out.
Yeah, that is, that you remember that, I think is so much fun. I've spoken to a lot of people about their journey to financial independence. And I would say probably 50% of the people that I speak to have an aha moment and that's when my life changed.
Yeah.
When do you think you discovered financial independence? Because this was at age 19, you saw the calculator, but did you start doing the extrapolations and, I can retire when I'm 30?
Yeah, I wish I was that smart. I definitely am not, was not, never would have been. I think, yeah, clearly. So I had probably two more lightning bolt moments that I can think of with FI. Now, one is in the future, clearly. It's more with investing and reading the stock series and Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins. But that's years in the future. The actual finding FI was just plain and simple reading Mr. Money Mustache and seeing the shockingly simple math behind early retirement. And that was, it's almost become cliche at this point, but like that was the article that changed my life. Hard stop, end of story. Like it just, that changed everything for me. And I in fairness, I was a big saver. My wife and I, going back to your earlier question of like, were you always money inclined or whatever? I think fortunately, and I don't know how I didn't mention this earlier, but we were always big savers. Like I was not a spender from the time we got our first jobs that my wife and I each, obviously separately at that point, but at 22 years old, I think both of us lived at home for a couple of years or a bunch of years and saved something like 80-90% of our income because frankly, we didn't spend anything. You know, we bought food and drinks and hanging out with our friends, but there was nothing that we like desperately wanted. We didn't need to prove how tough we were by buying BMWs and renting apartments by ourselves, right? To prove how mature and adult we were. It was like both of us just happened to be natural savers, I guess is the most succinct way of putting it. But guys, it was all for just, we didn't know at that point. It was just, all right, we're saving. But there was no goal. There was no understanding that you could withdraw a certain amount. And that's why Pete's article, The Shockingly Simple Math, that was everything. That just finally put some understanding and like behind, oh, wow, there's an end goal here. And I think that's what the phi number does so beautifully is, well, again, we can all kind of quibble, and I'm not sure how much you've gone into this on your podcast about like the 4% rule and whatever. Like we can quibble whether it's 4%, whether it's 3.75 or 4.5 or 3.25. I honestly don't care, frankly, because what it does is provide a North Star, right? As opposed to, hey, I'm saving. If you're one of the fortunate people who saves money, I'm just doing it for nothing. But when you say, oh, wow, 25 times your annual expenses, you control what your life costs, you need 25 times that. Again, we can quibble over the exact percentage, but 25 times and you reach phi. Plain and simple, end of story. Like that is just the greatest thing ever. It changes the whole calculation.
It's so funny how similar our stories are because we were saving too. I never even thought about why we were saving. And then just like you, I discovered MMM. I'm like, oh, wow, here's something cool I could do with my money. And it was actually removing something from my life, and that was my job. But Brad, I often wonder about myself. Would that thought ever have occurred to me? Would I have died with some tremendous amount of money because I would have worked until I was 60 because I never had this novel idea that I have enough money and I don't need to work anymore. So I'm so thankful for Mr. Money Mustache. And I hope that I would have been smart enough to figure it out eventually, but I
Do you
can't
think
say
you
that I
would have? I don't know. I really don't know. I don't think I would have been. Honestly, I really genuinely don't.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here nodding my head viciously to those of you who aren't watching on YouTube. No, I think you would have continued to work until you're 65 because that's what you do. And I remember Carl discovering Mr. Money Mustache and coming downstairs and telling me, I'm going to retire. I'm going to quit my job. I'm like, great, because it was such a source of stress for him. And I was a stay-at-home mom at the time. And I didn't care that he was going to quit his job because I just assumed he'd go and get another job. Like, you're not going to quit your job forever. And then he told me he was going to start a blog. I'm like, well, that's just dumb.
When I first discovered this, I'm like, this is so awesome. I'm going to tell everyone I know, like I'll tell all my friends, and this will be great. We can all hike and mountain bike. They'll do the exact same thing. They'll quit their jobs. And
How'd that work out for you, Carl?
Yeah. You could tell how it worked out. It did not work out well because I don't think I've convinced a couple people, but no friends or family. It's random strangers from the internet, maybe yes, but no. I think some of them have even bought more stuff as a result because they
Just
see
to spite you.
Yeah. They're like, well, sounds like deprivation. I don't want to do this. I'm going to react against this. Why do you think it's different for some people versus others? And I don't think we're any better than anyone else. Did we get caught at the right time, or what's the difference here? Because I think this is like winning the lottery, just like winning it over a decade or two instead of an instantaneous $2 million overnight.
Yeah, I hear you. I think, like, to me, to both of you, phi is a superpower. And it was so self-evident to me when I learned about it that, like, this almost sounds ridiculous to say out loud, but, like, it seems like the self-evident truth behind the entirety of personal finance. Like, this is the reason that personal finance exists. It's not to, like, get Susie Orman to tell you should save 5% for retirement 40 years from now. Like, Nobody cares about that. I think that, frankly, why, like, the entire personal finance industry is, they're just starting from the wrong point. They don't convince anybody. They don't hit and resonate on any type of emotional level, because it's all about, like, all you ever hear is save for retirement. For most people, when they hear that, when they're 22, 25, even 35, like, to save for 30 years from now, 40 years from now, like, that is inconceivable. And then it does seem like deprivation, because there's nothing even remotely immediate about it, not less intermediate about it, right? Like, I think FI is like an intermediate get rich slowly type thing. But traditional retirement is so far off, it doesn't seem real. You can't imagine who that person is, I think. And when you can say, like, okay, you can almost do like a horse race of, hey, you're going to, in all likelihood, wake up when you're 50 and have $0, because you're probably going to spend it all. Or, and maybe 50 was even the bad starting point. Let's just say 40, right? Like, if for somebody starting at 22, you're going to wake up at 40. I guarantee you're going to be broke like everybody else. That's what everybody else, middle class, upper middle class, everybody is essentially broke in terms of net worth. Now, that doesn't mean they don't make an income, right? And you can make a significant income, but to my opinion, if your net worth is 0 or minimal, you are broke. I don't care what your actual income is that year. And that might be a little bit of a hot take. I don't think it is for us, but like for a lot of people that might be. Or you can just reorient your life towards, hey, I'm going to really focus on getting back the only thing that matters, which is my time. I think when you orient it around, I'm going to get my freedom, my autonomy, and my time back, and then I can spend all the years that I'm here on this earth, this very finite period of time, doing what I want to do. I think that resonates with some select people. Now, Carl, I do agree with the premise of your question. I think, and I don't know why it only hits with certain people. I think this is an open question, and I don't think any of the three of us have solved this. Like, I think there might be some aspect of nature, right? There might be some aspect of like biology that goes into it, or just upbringing, or frankly, and I think probably most likely, it's some type of like external exogenous shock, like some kind of negative event that might have like woken somebody up to it. And they realize it's almost like a rock bottom type scenario. Like, I don't know what percentage. It would be interesting to do a survey, like what percentage of the FI community has come in their own self-selecting way, like based on one of those couple of things. And I'm sure we could come up with a bunch of different options. Like, do you guys have any other ways that you've seen people come in to the FI community, or any other thoughts on like why it doesn't resonate with everybody?
I think that people who it doesn't resonate with fear that they're going to have to give up. And they're not just giving up something small, they're giving up something large. One of the earliest FI bloggers out there was Jacob Lund-Fisker from Early Retirement Extreme. And it's right there in his name. He eats rice and beans and peanut butter and jelly and lives on like, I don't know, $1.50 a year or something. And people see that and they're like, no, I don't want to give up that. Well, that doesn't have to be your life. That certainly isn't our life. I don't think that's your life, Brad. You don't have to be so extreme. And, you know, this actually was highlighted in a presentation at Bigger Pockets. I work at Bigger Pockets. That's my day job. And my Bigger Pockets Money co-host, Scott Trench, is the CEO of the company. And he gave a presentation. We call them lunch and learns. He gave a presentation on the concept of financial independence, the concept of saving for retirement, and, you know, you can, the 4% rule and, you know, compound interest and all of that. And at the end of his presentation, which, you know, Scott, you know, he's not preachy. He's very fact-based.
No, not at all.
At the end of the presentation, one of the girls in the office raised her hand and said, but I'm young right now. I want to live my life. I can think about retirement later. And I'm thinking to myself, if Scott Trench can't convince you to do this, who can? I mean,
Yeah,
this
who
was a
can?
really well thought out presentation. It was, it was just, here are facts. And I am really excited to say that she has since changed her mind and, is doing more towards it. But that, like, I just think people have this idea that they're going to have to give up everything. And,
Yeah.
like Paula says, you can afford anything, you just can't afford everything. And that's such a great tagline because what is important to you? Brad, is it having designer clothes? I'm going to guess no, but I don't want to
No.
speak for you.
Yep, you went out on a limb on that one, Mindy. Early, the FIRE movement was painted in this really negative caricature way. I think, like you said, with Jacob from Early Retirement Extreme, I think even not that any of us think that Pete is living a life of deprivation by any stretch, but I think just when you hear that people are living on $28,000 or $32,000, or in Jacob's case, $7,000, like that sounds ridiculous, and you think immediately that they must be depriving themselves. They must be living these horrible lives. And I think when that's the starting point, I think a lot of people just shut down and aren't even intrigued to move further. And I think, one thing that we have done at Choose FI, or I'd like to believe that, like, I'm okay patting myself on the back about this. I don't normally do that, but like, I think we've normalized the conversation. Like, I think we've democratized is a bit of a crazy word, but like, I think we've on some level democratized FI and moved it away from like this super extreme culty FIRE to, oh wow, this is something that millions upon millions of people are pursuing all around the world. That we're pursuing lives of freedom and autonomy based around what we value. And that means, obviously, because there is a finite income for everyone has a finite income, right? Unless, unless you're in some weird hedge fund or something, but you have to make choices. And I think that's part of the fun of it, to me at least, is, okay, look, there's a place for frugality. And I think a lot of people like to say, like, oh, it's this abundance, you can just earn more. And like, that's fine, you can on some level, but like, frugality still has a place in the FI community. But, and a big place, I think it always will be. But I think also spending on things that really provide you value has a big place too. And I don't know that that was really the conversation 7+ years ago. And I think it's important for people to understand, like, we live really, really great lives, and I think going back to like that list of people who might be intrigued, like, I think people who are into like games, gamifying life, board games, quantified self, and any of those type of people, like, I look at what we've done as living the same middle or upper middle class life as everybody else around us, but just winning at life in the process instead of being essentially broke like everybody else. We've just made a couple little tweaks. And those tweaks have led us to have a real significant multi-million-dollar net worth, right? And it's like, I mean, just, you guys know the simple stuff, like drive old cars. And this doesn't mean you have to do this, but this is what we've done. We drove old cars. For the last 20 years, we've driven old cars. That's been when you compound the amount of money that we've saved over 2 cars over 20 years, that's literally many, many hundreds of thousands of dollars just for doing that. Driving perfectly functional, nice cars, but not going to turn any heads, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Buying the least expensive 4-bedroom house in the best school district. We even went to the best school district in Richmond. But we got essentially the least expensive 4-bedroom house. That decision, our house cost $1,200 a month. That was what it cost for forever. And I mean, a 1-bedroom apartment in any area of Richmond costs more than that. So it's like, holy cow, this was brilliant. That saved us hundreds of thousands of dollars compounded, like eating at home, like just a couple little things. Well, and then you can spend lavishly, right?
Yeah, and like you said, just a couple of little things. You don't have to do all of these. If cars really no pun intended, but if cars really rev your engine, then have a great car and buy the smaller house and the less expensive house and eat at home. And or if you really are a foodie and you love going out to dinner, then have the older car and the older house. And you don't care about your clothes, shop at a thrift store. That's better for the environment anyway. There's all these things that you can choose to do, and you don't have to pull every single lever. It doesn't have to be, this total life of deprivation. But I think when people first hear about it, they're like, oh, somebody is going to be putting limitations on my money and my spending. And the only person that's putting limitations on your money and spending is you. So figure out what it is that you love and what it is that doesn't really matter to your life.
Yeah.
And, go from there. We had on the Bigger Pockets Money podcast, we interviewed Liz from Frugal Woods, and she was talking about how when she first discovered financial independence, she's like, great, we are cutting out everything. And then the next month, she's like, wow, that really kind of sucked. I want to add some of this stuff back in. So instead of just adding it back in, she looked for frugal ways to add it back in. And there were some things that she didn't miss at all. And there were other things that she really missed. So, I wouldn't recommend going down her lifestyle of, cut out everything and then see what really you missed. But cut out one thing and see if you really missed it, and cut out something else and see if, oh, you know what, I want to bring that back in. And,
Yeah.
see what really, really makes your life awesome and what really is just there because it's there.
Yeah. Yeah, totally agree. And I'm not sure that I got my point across. I was a little fumbling around this, but like the gamifying life, like I think it's fun. Like I find this absolutely fun to live that same, literally upper middle class, like middle class lifestyle as everybody else, and just these couple little tweaks. I feel like I'm winning. I feel like I'm winning at some secret game that most people don't even know exists. And like Liz from Frugal Woods, that's a perfect example. She talked way back when about most people think, and it almost all of these sentences start with most people think, right? Like this is common thought or society says. Most people think living in cities is really expensive. And she's like, no, it's not. It's the exact opposite. Sure, the rent might be more than in a comparable small town or rural area, obviously. But like there are thousands of free things to do every single day in a city like Boston where they lived at the time. Thousands of free things. You need to just apply a little bit of creativity. If you can be a little creative and think a little bit differently, I think you can win at life in so many different ways. And that's just like, that's one almost silly example, but it's just a great one because people think society says ... living in cities is expensive. Well, it doesn't really have to be. And that was just one of those that sticks in my head 7 years later.
That's so good. Brad, I think all three of us are pretty similar in that I don't know if programmed is the right word, but we're disposed to like fire and embrace this from the onset. The fact that we were savers maybe predisposed us to embrace fire more readily. We had some programming back there in the back of our brains, but not everyone is like that. We were on the Ramit Sethi podcast, and the point of that podcast was we were talking about how we spend our money and enjoy it a little bit more. And someone made the comment on there. They said, if you think spending is difficult, imagine how difficult it's going to be going from being a spender to being a saver. So how do you reach people that might not have our disposition towards fire or saving money, like someone who, I don't even want to stereotype anyone. So I'll just leave the question at that. And maybe you have some good stories you could share with us, Brad.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's really not. I think for me, I usually start with just how stressful a life is when you're living on the edge. And again, this is many people who make significant incomes. If they're not saving, if they have no net worth, they're living on the edge. They're poor. And I use that word very intentionally because it like hits you in the face, right? And if you are not saving money, if you don't have any type of net worth or anything, you are poor. And I think how that actually impacts people is their lives are constantly stressed based on money. And that is ever pervasive. It's always there. I think all three of us would say money is probably the least stressful aspect of our lives. And that is just, it's such a gift that, like, I don't think, I'll speak for myself here, obviously. Like, I don't think I consciously think about it often enough, just how incredible it is that money is not a stress in our lives at all. Nothing. 0%. The only way that I think about money is, where am I investing this month? Like, oh, I have some extra cash lying around. Am I going to put it in a high yield savings account for this now guaranteed 5%, which is amazing? Do I put it in the market like I know I should? Like, those are the funny little arguments I have with myself now. But it's not like an existential argument around like, oh my God, I don't have $1,000 saved up, or, oh, the refrigerator broke. Am I going to have to put that on a credit card or borrow money or get a payday loan? Like, that's what a lot of people have to worry about, right? And it's like, do you want to live that way? Like, even if you don't think financial independence is for you, and I would certainly question the premise of that assumption. But even if you say, yeah, I love my job. Like, again, we could argue around this kind of silly line of reasoning, but I love my job. I never want to quit. It's always going to be perfect. My boss is never going to leave. It's going to be great for the next 50 years. Okay, well, that's fine. Even if you absolutely love your job and you think it's never going to change and it's going to be perfect, that's fine. Millions of people love their jobs. But I guarantee you, your life will be less stressful with $5,000 in the bank, with $10,000 in the bank. Guaranteed. Dramatically less stressful. I mean, you will not even believe it. And then I think what a lot of us know is this starts, it's like that snowball rolling downhill, right? Like, you get a little win. It starts to feel good. You realize, oh, wow, I've made this little change. That's just like a tiny little optimization. Like, the one that I always start people with is their cell phone. There are still so many people spending $100 a line on their cell phone. It is the most insane thing in the entire world when Mint Mobile exists now for $20 a month, essentially. Like, it is ludicrous. And then you have a family of 3 or 4 phones. I mean, you're talking, somebody could save a couple $100 for their family. And I don't, a month, every single month. And in 1 year, there's the amount that you need to save. And you realize, oh, wow, you mean this whole community of fire people like actually knows what they're talking about, right? Like, I made this one change. My life was impacted negatively 0%. And I have an extra $200 or $300 a month. Oh, I wonder what else I can do. I wonder how else. And then it starts getting fun. Then you start realizing, oh, wow, I can contribute more to my 401k. And I don't notice that the money's gone, right? Like, because I think most people have this predilection to spend all their money. And if you're just doing something smart, like you're increasing your 401k contribution, you're never going to notice those X number of dollars that's less coming out. Because frankly, if you timed it around your next raise, it might actually net out. Like, this is like probably the second thing that I would tell people is, okay, you're a little cautious about doing this. I get it. That's fine. The next time you get a raise and it's set to go in, that's when I want you to increase your 401k contribution, because you're still going to take home more money in all likelihood, and you're going to be saving. How can I get these little wins for people to snowball? And then I think they're going to start, and I've seen in my own experience, people start realizing, like, this is fun. There's no downside. Oh, and look, my net worth is actually positive now. It's increasing. Like, this is something I can do. And I think when people, that kind of goes back, and I know I'm long-winded here, but like, I think one of the beautiful parts about FI is that, going back to that 4% rule, is like, we have that North Star, and it's attainable, and it's based on something that we control, which is our annual expenses. Okay? That's fully under our control. Whereas I think human beings in general, when they are told by the Susie Ormans of the world, hey, you're going to need $10 or $15 million, $20 million to retire because healthcare. Like, that's essentially like how she says it. Like, because healthcare is going to be expensive, right? Like, it's just fear mongering. It's all fear mongering. It's ridiculous. And what do people do when they hear I need to save $15 million? Throw their hands up and say, I'm going to YOLO the hell out of this. Right? Because why not? Why the hell not? I'm going to live for today. So I think when it's in your control and you feel like you have some control over your life, that's a totally different starting point.
Yeah, I like that so much. And the little wins reminds me of something I do that's kind of similar. So when I'm working out and trying to either accomplish a weight loss goal or a strength goal, I take pictures of myself every week. And there's nothing more motivating than seeing a little bit of change. It makes you want to do it that much harder and that much more because you already have that little win and you can see it. There's something measurable there. So getting those little wins is so important. Another thing I like to do, which probably isn't nearly as effective, is ask people what their perfect life looks like. And I kind of stole this from the Playing with Fire movie where Scott asks Taylor, what are the top 10 things most important? I think if you ask people that question and phrase it either way, the top 10 things, or like, what does your perfect life look like? Brad, I don't think most people are going to say, oh, I want a helicopter or some ridiculous car. They're going to say, I want to be able to have a good relationship with my spouse or spend time with my children. And there's two thoughts around that. Assuming they do say that, those things don't cost money. The second thought is, well, here's a real easy way to attain this, especially if you're young. You just have to make small tweaks now, and you can have this. There's going to be a little bit of a waiting period, but you're not going to have to live a life of deprivation. And you can have this life if you just do these small things now that you alluded to, Brad. So start at the end and maybe work backwards, because I don't think most people's ideal life would be some crazy... I always reference the show Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. Do you remember that show, Brad, or am I?
Yeah, from way back in the day.
Yeah, when
Robin
that guy,
Leach, right?
Yeah, Robin Leach. He'd be on the boat sipping champagne, and he'd show all these houses. And funny enough, Brad, I remember my grandmother used to be obsessed with that show. It would always be on when I go to her house, like on Sunday nights or whenever it was on. And that was my image of a rich person. I'm like, wow, they all live in these huge houses and have Bentleys or Rolls Royces and all this. And then I read The Millionaire Next Door, which is debatable because they paid people to do that. So that might not be the best example either. But I think it's a lot more realistic than the Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous show.
Yeah.
Well, think about all the millionaires we know. They're all millionaires next door. They're not Lifestyles of the Rich and the Famous millionaires.
Yeah, they drive RAV4s and Toyota Corollas. It is true, lifestyle, or at least in our narrow view, we are the millionaire next door, and so are all the other millionaires that we know. Brad, a funny story is one of the neighbors thought we were destitute because of the cars we had and the fact that I worked on them myself. I'm like, no, you don't understand. Let me show you some stuff.
That is funny. Yeah, there's a lot of truth to that millionaire next door. I'm not sure, like you said, some of the background on it. It's almost neither here nor there, but like I think there's a lot more truth in that than certainly a lot of the other financial wisdom you see from the traditional mainstream world.
One other thing I love to do, and I'm really deeply thankful for ChooseFi, because one of the best things you can do for someone who questions this is hook them up with other people in the financial independence community. Go to a ChooseFi meetup where you'll learn that all these people aren't nuts, and even better yet, go to like a campfire or an event on the ChooseFi website. ChooseFi is a great way to network and meet people and realize that we're not crazy. Anyone who's on the fence about these events is always like, oh, I don't want to go. We'll talk about index funds for a weekend. I'm like, you have no idea, because that topic might come up for like 3 or 1% of the time, or probably 0%, but it's all these people talking about what they want to do with their lives and all these places they're going to go to and all these dreams they have. And I don't think there's anything more inspiring than being around a group of people like that and seeing what financial independence really looks like.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the community events, the larger community events, like you said, CampFi, Economy, which doesn't, by the title, suggest that it's Fi, but that's really, in my eyes, the largest Fi gathering in the world. And now 5 Freedom Retreats is something that Amy Minkley is doing in Bali, actually, which is super cool. You know, the Chautauqua events used to exist. And then, yeah, like you guys mentioned, ChooseFi, I think probably the best thing we've ever done is form those local groups. And we're recording this in early 2024. That's something I'm trying to provide, like personally, like that's my big project for the year, is to provide more support to the local groups, because I think they are the heartbeat of our whole community and the larger financial independence community. And like, frankly, like we've always tried to give them just a ton of just runway and autonomy to do their own thing. But I think we went too far and didn't really provide any support from Choose FI. And now I'm like just trying to do simple things like, hey, here's an email list, or hey, here are the 8 different, and I'm making up the number 8, but the 8 different types of meetups that really, really work, kind of like crowdsource across the local groups. And I think to have like a best of, as opposed to, hey, we're just going to meet up in a brewery once a month for forever, basically. And like, it's really nice. And those are still fun. But even something like we've seen actually Diana Merriam, who founded Economy, she in the Cincinnati Choose FI and FI group, they started these case studies. So someone was brave enough to stand up in front of the entire local group and basically talk about their financial life and really ask the room, crowdsource, hey, these are the things I'm struggling with. Here's what I'm thinking. What do you think about my plan? And like for an hour or two, people would go through one person's financial life with like showing numbers and everything. It is so brave to do that. And that is sweeping through the local groups. I keep seeing, I know we had one in Richmond here in Virginia, and it was so popular. Somebody else in the room said, I need to do this. And they literally, 3 weeks later, we had another one. I think they decided to like, I have to check this, but I think they decided to leave their jobs or go on a mini retirement based on that case study. And it's just like, it's so cool. So again, yeah, choosefi.com/local is where you find the list of those. I think there's somewhere between 250 and 300 groups across the world. And yeah, it's just been a really neat thing.
Oh, I'm so glad that there's a place to go to find them all. I know that when we're traveling, I'll reach out to your community manager and say, hey, we're going to be here. Is there a local group? And we'll reach out. She'll add us to the local group, and then we'll be able to, jump in and say, hey, we're going to be here. Would anybody like to meet up? And those are more informal meetups because we don't have our stuff together right now, and we don't plan ahead for these.
I love that you do that. And that's actually, not to get into like the inside baseball, but like I think this is important. Obviously, your listeners are FI community members. Like exactly that. Like when you go to, hey, I'm taking a trip to Orlando, Florida, and let's assume I'm not Brad from Choose FI, but I'm just taking a trip to Orlando. Like I don't necessarily want to join the Orlando Facebook group for the rest of eternity. What if on our local page, and this is again that support that I'm providing, there's an email address for the admins. So you don't have to actually join anything. You can just reach out and say, hey, I'm going to be in town. Does anybody want to, or does anyone want to meet up? Or is anything going on that week for the local group? Or like, do you have any suggestions? Like, I think that's a way. I'm also going to have an email list generally. So lots of these little, again, it sounds like inside baseball, but I think it's really going to help these local groups. And, honestly, I should have done it 6 years ago, but everything was working great, and it's better late than never. So it's going to be hundreds upon hundreds of hours of work, but I think it's going to be useful.
Yeah. And it's so much fun to meet people in different areas. I'm a real estate agent. There's people that come to Longmont, Colorado, and they want to just see the area. So to be able to reach out and say, hey, we'd like to, connect with you. We'd like to connect with people in the area because we're thinking about moving here, or, the Denver group, or, wherever they're trying to meet or move, or just, meet new people in different areas because we travel to San Diego frequently. That's a favorite vacation spot for us. So we've joined the San Diego group so that when we're on our way out there, hey, is anybody coming? Is anything happening right now? It's just so nice to be able to talk to people in the same space. You share the same language. And Carl, I do have to correct you. At Campfi, index funds do come up. It's not 0%, but it also isn't 100% of the time. It is
No.
shockingly low how frequently we're talking about money-related and investing-related topics as much as just random life stuff.
Agreed. Shockingly low. I
Shockingly
would
low.
wholeheartedly agree with that.
Brad, where can people find you and ChooseFi online?
All right. So you're listening to a podcast, so you know how to find a podcast. Just search Choose, like make a choice, Choose FI. And that's the easiest place. So I'd love it if you'd subscribe. Like we mentioned, choosefi.com/local. If you're looking to join a local group, I think really that's the best place. I'm kind of on Twitter, Brad ChooseFi, but I mostly just lurk there. But yeah, just join a community. It's not about me. It's about joining the community. If you really want to get in touch with me, subscribe to my newsletter, choosefi.com/subscribe, and just hit reply to any single one of those emails. I read every single reply.
Ooh, and Brad's email list is my favorite. I don't think I've ever responded, but I read it every week with the wins and resources.
Nice. And listeners, next week we are going to be talking about the number one most important financial decision you can make. So thank you so much for listening. And Brad, thank you so much for joining us today. We will talk to you again soon. With Carol.
I love the Mindy on money and Carl too.
Carl, that was Carl's idea, not mine. I really feel like we should have recorded that conversation, Carl.
We had like 50 other ideas, and like anything else with the internet, the first million URLs you try, it's a bunch of domain squatters that want like $20,000 for their stupid URL. So Mindy on Money was probably 586 on that list, and that's what we arrived at. It sounded better than Carl on Cash or anything else we could come up with.
What are you guys chuckling at? What's going on over there?
So it might be cool to go down there and do a workout. I expect you to have your shirt off, though, Brad. That's pretty common in cul-de-sac.
All right, dude.
Mindy did request some pictures, so if you see me with my phone out, I won't share them with anyone. Do you have water down here?
I do.
Okay, can I have just a sip?
Wow. I brought water.
It's like brown in there.
It's a stain. Why are you calling me out? There's a video. You were going to be able to use that, and now you can't.
I can use everything.
No, you can't.
What can't I use?
You're asking me why the mouthpiece on my water bottle is stained.
No, it's probably just mildew.
It's not. I wash it all the time. Why are you so mean?
I'm just kidding. I'm not mean. I love your water bottle.
Email Carl at mindyonmoney.com and tell him not to be mean to me. Oh. I have a cramp in my hand. Hold on.
Oh, God.
How do you get a cramp in your hand?
I don't know. My hand, my body's just cramping up lately because life is awful. Oh.
You made me freeze this morning when I went and parked the car. Yeah,
I invited you to park way closer, and you're like, oh. No, I got to park in the way back of the gym lot.
I had to drop you off at the front.
You didn't have to. You chose to. You could have chosen to park closer, but you wanted to as far away as you possibly could from the door.
I don't like parking next to people. And I forgot what my second thought is.
Yeah, I think it can be said either way. I always say choose FI. I think it can be said either way. I always say choose.